Okay, so we're getting back into we basically took a little holiday with the Hebrew alphabet there for about 6 weeks. So our last Bible study sort of left off at in Deuteronomy, and so where Deuteronomy stops is the children of Israel are now on the east side of the Jordan River, and they're getting ready to go in and take the promised land. And if you remember back in Numbers, they had opportunity to go there, but they didn't trust God. They didn't believe God for the place because 10 out of 12 of them says, yeah, it's a great land, but can't go there. It's not, there's too many big people up there. But Joshua and another man called Caleb were the two men, the two spies that says, no, we can do it because God says we can. But God judged that. God judged that disbelief, and they took 40 years then to get there. So that kind of weeded out the old generation, and so now they're getting ready to come in. So today we're just going to do an outline of the book of Joshua, but I would like to go back and look at some of the stories of what's going on, particularly in and around the walls of Jericho and the dealing with AI and those sort of early chapters, and just take some bits and pieces out of it. So, right. Oops, there we go. Now, the basics of Joshua, basically the author is Joshua, okay, the son of Nun or son of Nun, and the date of it was basically covering between 1405 BC and 1365 BC. The actual conquest of the land took about 7 years. Okay, so obviously what's being covered here is more than 7 years, because there's the conquest that goes on, and then once they sort of get the land, then it's the divvying up of the land, in amongst all the 12 tribes. And then it runs on to Joshua's death at the end, and Joshua was 110 when he passed away. So obviously Joshua couldn't write about his own death. So that was somebody else that did that. We don't know who that was. Could have been the likes of maybe Samuel or somebody like that, or Ezra. These people that were very much involved in the compilation of the Old Testament. Because you can't write about your own death. So, but the theme is living by faith and coming into maturity, because the Israelites, have spent a lot of time in the wilderness. They've trusted God with that, in that process of going about. But when it comes to moving on, you need to trust God for the bigger and better things, because God doesn't want you to stay in kind of just one place. He wants you to grow. He wants you to develop. He wants you to improve and all that kind of thing. Now, what God was blessing them with was, not necessarily material possession, not necessarily land possession, even though land was a big part of it. But really what it talks about maturing in your faith. And that is the great goal of God for us. So, as we've said in past Bible studies, the promised land is not a picture of heaven. Okay, because in the promise, if the promised land was a picture of heaven, then heaven would have a whole pile of sin in it. So because the promised land is a lot of difficulty. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of there's the sin of Achan and things of this nature. A lot of places where people didn't trust God, and then there's consequences for that. So, so this is more about maturing and growing up, and that kind of thing. So, Right. Well, let's look at the outline of Joshua just a bit, and then we'll cover a few scriptures just in regard to Joshua himself. And so the first part of Joshua is Joshua leading Israel. He is the man that was handpicked, by God, by Moses to lead after Moses' death. So, but it was really at God's instigation that Joshua would be the man to lead. So the first thing they are told really in the first chapter, and this is where we would know verses here, be strong and of good courage, and all those sorts of things. We'll look at those verses a little bit later on, but that chapter 1 is God saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. You take it on, and this is what you need to do. So we'll look at that chapter a little bit just later on today. But basically, it's obey the commands, take courage, because all these people are going into a situation that they have never been to before. Okay, so and I would say, as they're crossing the Jordan, and the Jordan at that time was flooding, so there was lots of water. Okay, some of the people of that generation as kids may have remembered going through the Red Sea, but certainly all the adults have died at this stage. So the passing through the Red Sea, I would say for a lot of them was only a memory that was talked about. So to cross then another body of water was for them was not a known quantity. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing what happened, because it says that God prevented the water, coming down the river at a place called Adam, which was actually 14 miles upstream. So it was a good distance away, and so God stopped it way up there, and so the stoppage of water was different than what the parting of the Red Sea was. So, but this chapter 1, it's a great chapter. There's verses in there I think all of us should memorize and take heed to. Chapter 2 was then they haven't crossed the river yet, but they sent some people over to spy out the land, and this is the story about Rahab and how she was this woman in Jericho who was a harlot. It's interesting that she's in the lineage of Christ, So when you look at Matthew's genealogy of all the different men that are there, see all the women that are mentioned. They're all dodgy people, because Rahab was a Canaanite, not a godly woman, was not in a godly sort of occupation or any of that kind of thing, but yet God chose to rescue her and spare her, and the Bible's quite clear that she was then part of that lineage, and then you have Tamar that's mentioned, and that was a bit of an old debacle with Judah, in earlier days than this. And then it talks about Bathsheba, not by name, but mentions her by position. And then the other person that's mentioned in the genealogy of Matthew that was questionable in a sense was Mary herself. Now, Mary herself was not of questionable background, but the whole problem was that she was pregnant before she was married. That's a problem. So I do not think that's us categorizing sin. We're all questionable. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, and I think that's what God is saying. He's saying, look, it doesn't matter who and what you are and what your background is. If I choose to use you, I'm going to use you. So Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. I don't think it does. No. Mary had 7 demons. Yeah. So yeah, there's a whole pile of Marys, and the Mary I'm talking about here is not Mary Magdalene. It's Mary, the mother of Jesus. No, but the way you said Mary Magdalene,
people think that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. I've heard people say that.
Yes, no, but the Bible doesn't say that. Yeah, no, there's an assumption about that because of, maybe the fact that she had 7 demons in her and all this state. So anyway, but she was part, obviously, of the entourage with Jesus. So, but anyway, so there's this story here in chapter 2 of the spies. They go into Jericho, find Rahab. Rahab hides them up on the roof and stuff, and but she then, got the promise from the spies. Look, if you're going to come and take the place out, then spare me, kind of thing. So. Yes.
Right from Egypt.
Yeah. Yes. So it wasn't these people showing up on the doorstep was not an unknown quantity. The people in Jericho were scared out of their pants. They were just really tied up in knots about that, because they heard, like you say, about all these people coming, through the wilderness over that period of time. Well, she did. She told lies about where the men were, because when she was and people end up taking that story and then saying, okay, there we go. There's the Bible justifying lying. Now, you have to understand that woman at the time was not a redeemed person. Okay, so God used it. God didn't make her lie, and so there's not the people that do that kind of thing, where they use a story like that to try to justify lying. Basically, they're trying to justify their own bad behavior. So because we would look at that and say, oh well, sure, since they lied, well, I can lie too. Well, no.
Saved at that time.
No. So now in chapters 3 and 4, there's then the preparations for entering the land, both spiritual and physical, and crossing the Jordan. So there's this whole thing about getting the ark and having the ark out at a distance. And people getting prepared to go across the river and all that kind of thing. So there's some very, very interesting things that we'll look at later on when we get there. So, but there was a lot of physical preparedness that it had to do. So the Christian walk is not just about spiritual things. It is about mental and emotional things. It is about physical things. So you have to treat all those areas of life correctly, so because we're physical people, live in a physical earth, and we deal with physical things, so we have to, not necessarily deal with physical things as the world deals with them, but God does give us plenty of stuff about how to treat your body, how to do things in the world in which you live. Chapter 5, amongst other things, there was the manna had stopped, okay, because the people were now had crossed the river, they were now in the land, and they ate of the fruit of the land, and then God stopped the manna. Okay, so but right at the end of chapter 5, there is this encounter with the captain of the Lord's hosts. Again, very, very interesting encounter, and we'll look at that later on. So now from there, so this is all preparation sort of stuff. Okay, so we haven't taken any of the land. We've gotten into the very edge of it. So where the children of Israel are coming in from is the land of Moab, and they're going into the crossing the river Jordan just as it enters into the Dead Sea. Or a little bit north of that, because Jericho is not too far from there. Jericho's a dead ancient town. Okay, so there's, Jericho's there today too, but it's, been a lot of iterations of it. So now that they're in the land, now it's time for the battles that take place. So we have the Battle of Jericho. which really is talking about God's faithfulness, because when Joshua has the encounter with the captain of the Lord's hosts, what he had to understand first and foremost was not the instruction about how to deal with the land. He had to have an encounter with God himself. So in order to then trust the guidance that you get from God, you have to know the guide. Right? So once he got that encounter with God, then whatever God told him to do, he says, "All right, fine, that's okay. I can cope with that." And and it's kind of in chapter 6 and in the first couple of verses, it's kind of funny verses because it says that Jericho was shut up. Nobody got in, nobody went out, and it was because of the children of Israel, and they're all tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them, all down below, and then you have Jericho, which was a big town, but not big in terms of what we think is big. Okay, Jericho only covered about 9 acres. Okay, so it wasn't a big place, but it was a very fortified place because you could ride 2 chariots next to each other side by side going around the edge of the wall. So it was a big, thick wall. And about 30,000 people lived within the wall. So if you can imagine 30,000 people living within a 9-acre space, that's pretty tight, So, but you have to realize big walls. These guys have rocks. These guys have bows and arrows. Gravity prevails. You can shoot down and boom. So the Israelites are even though there's lots of them, have a disadvantage because they're down, they're up. Okay. So, So the lay of the land is doors are bolted, they're shut, everything's impregnable, and God says, "See, I've given it into your hand." It's obvious. And Joshua went, "Absolutely, it is." Now, to anybody outside of that, it was like, no, this is not an obvious sort of situation, but through the eyes of faith, and understanding God's faithfulness, you can see, beyond the circumstances. So Jericho is about God's faithfulness because they did exactly what God told them to do. They told them to go around the city, march around it in silence, have the ark, down there and parading around. They did that once a day for 6 days, and then on the 7th day they did it 7 times, and then they shouted at the end of it, and the walls went boom. So God blessed that, but God gave them instruction about what not to do, and that was don't be taking any of the stuff. Okay, so there's a lot of spoil, a lot of gear in Jericho, but that is to be destroyed, or if it's valuable stuff, i.e., like silver, gold, that kind of gear, that was to be put into the treasury of God. So there was very, very strict things about that.
Jericho, seeing the old city and where they had built now, and remember looking at the ruins, and they said then, which didn't surprise me, that the one wall of the city fell at a later date, which would have been, if you were reading your Bible, it would have been the wall where Rahab's house was, but they had come to the conclusion that it didn't all come down together, and they had come to the conclusion that this wall was a later.
Yeah, because her house was built on the wall. Yeah. So
that doesn't surprise you. That just boosts your. And you're talking, pardon?
It did come down.
It did come down, but Rahab's house at the time probably was saved, and the rest went down.
Yeah.
Right.
So
it ties in with the Bible.
Yeah. Now, chapter 7 was the Battle of Ai, but that's talking about Israel's failure. Because sometimes what happens when in your Christian walk is that you say, "Oh, this is how God did it. So easy. See the next town, not a problem. We'll just go and wipe it out, and that's the end of it." And so because Ai was a small fortification, and basically they were like, just send a few thousand guys up there, knock it out. That's not a big deal. And but people can be so short-sighted. You know, you have this whole thing with Jericho, which was a big triumph and a big victory, and God got glory and all that kind of stuff. And then so quickly they just go, oh, thanks God, that's great. See, this small place, we can do it ourselves. Well, no, there's not anything in your life that you can do yourself, you know. So, but really, what the problem with AI was not so much the size of AI. I think it was twofold. One, the Israelites didn't inquire of God as to how to deal with it because they were just going, easy peasy lemon squeezy. And then the other major problem was that there was sin in the camp. Okay, there was the whole thing with Achan, which we'll go and visit. But in order to inherit, obedience is required. If you want to move on in your Christian life, you got to obey God. Okay, you can't pick and choose. You can't cherry pick it. So.
You remember the wee course the youngsters used to sing because you thought the Battle of Jericho and the wall came, which is totally wrong. It was God that fought the Battle of Jericho.
Yeah,
nothing to do with.
Yeah, because they did all they did was walk around the place, and so then we in chapter 9 have a story about the Gibeonites turning to God. So there were elements of people in the land that were saying, right, we'll follow God and not buck up against it. Now there was issues there about the some of the people kind of pretending there were different things and what have you, but the Gibeonites, they were like, nope, we see the power of God here, so we'll join you all, because God, as you read through the beginnings of the Old Testament, you see an awful lot of provision for the foreigner that's among you. The foreigner that's within your gates. So God was always interested in other people, and the salvation of other people. So, but there was Canaanite kings, though, that collaborated together to defeat Israel, and you see that in chapter 10 and chapter 11. They thought, well, if we bandy together, and in the promised land, you would have had the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and all the other ites. So I know when you say Girgashites, then it talks anyway. So the king, these were all people that were all against each other anyway. But then they thought, okay, well, let's get together and we'll deal with Israel. I remember when I was in high school back in Arlington, Virginia. There was a lot of ethnic problems within the high school. The blacks didn't get on with the whites, and the whites didn't get on with the Chinese, and the Chinese didn't get on with the Vietnamese, and so it was all these kids that were all in these different groups. But there was one particular afternoon where the Chinese, whom we called the Chinks, they were going to have a big rumble. Yeah, so there was going to be this big rumble. So, but the blacks and the white kids who didn't get on with each other, they got together because they thought if they got together, then they would be able to defeat the Chinese kids.
You're right.
So anyway, I'm watching this from my school bus. There's 27 police cars that show up to go and put this down, and the Chinese kids came out with bats. They were going to knock heads in, and and these are what, 16-year-olds, so the cops were there. I was sitting on my bus getting ready to go home because obviously I wasn't being involved in this. But so I was a pacifist. It's like peace, man. So. No. What? No, the Irish are amazing, because in our Civil War there was Irish regiments on both sides. So it was like whoever was paying the most money, but anyway, more teachers got hurt than kids because they were blocking the Chinese kids from, hitting and doing, it was an awful thing, so, but anyway, this kind of Canaanite kings collaborating to defeat Israel kind of reminded me of those old days. Who won?
Irish.
Yeah. So, no, it wasn't. No, I went home. That's right. I went home. So, now chapter 12 is then about Israel's victories that they have, over the different factions of people that are in the land. Now, the next sort of half of the book here is then how the land is divided. So the first part of the book here is that 7 years then of conquest. All right. So now we're a little bit past that now. This particular section of the book is rather, for lack of a better term, boring. Okay, because it is kind of saying so and so, here's such and such, and there's the land, and this is where it is, and how it's positioned. So it's a lot easier just to look at the map. Okay, so but again, there are things in there in those scriptures that we can pull out and get things out of. So we'll try to look at some of that stuff. In chapter 13, there is the allotments to the eastern tribes. Now, this was Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. Okay, and this is in chapter 13. So this is on the west, or the eastern side of the Jordan River. Okay, so basically, the reason the Reubenites and the Gadites and half the tribe of Manasseh are over there, that's really not part of the promised land as such, but their cows really liked it over there. Their cattle were happy. So they were like, well, we're all good. We don't need to get into this land. So Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob, but the reason he didn't get the inheritance was because he defiled his father's bed. So he had a bit of a thing. And these other tribes, Gad, Manasseh, Gideon, when we look at the book of Judges, Gideon came from the tribe of Manasseh, and basically he was saying, I'm from the tribe of Manasseh, and I'm the least in the tribe of Manasseh, and my father's house is the least in that family and that tribe and all this, So, their estimation of themselves were pretty poor, So these tribes were really not much on for blessing. They were like, we're happy enough with our cattle. They seem to like it over here. Plenty of grass, dead on. But but what Joshua basically insisted was, and Moses really was, look, when you go over into the promised land, you Reubenites and Gadites and you guys go over there and help these people conquer the land. And then if you want to go back to your old thing, that's fine. But so it's interesting how it's referred here is allotments, not inheritance. It's basically what they settled for. Okay, so then in chapters 14 and 15, then there's the discussion about the inheritance of Judah. Okay, and Judah is the largest of the tribes. Judah was the first tribe that anytime the pillar of cloud rose up to move when they were going through the wilderness, when they were encamped, Judah was always the first tribe to get up and lead. Okay, and of course the Lord Jesus Christ comes from the tribe of Judah. So there's the discussion about the inheritance of that. So the Judah land area is quite big. It's everything from sort of Jerusalem on down. So it's a very, very large area. Then there's the inheritance in chapter 16 and 17 of Ephraim and the other half tribe of Manasseh. So it's interesting that there's this kind of divided up sort of sections of Manasseh. But anyway, so that is talked about in chapter 16 and 17. Ephraim is just on the top edge of Judah. Joshua actually comes from the tribe of Ephraim. So Ephraim is one of Joseph's sons. Okay, so if you remember, the 12 tribes, and the Levites didn't get an inheritance because they were the priestly tribe, so they weren't counted as such. So how you then balanced off the 12 tribes was basically you had Joseph, but Joseph then had two sons, and so he had Ephraim and Manasseh. So in chapter 18 we have the inheritance of Benjamin. Benjamin was one of the smaller tribes, but it was quite powerful. So Benjamin was really much a part of Judah, in the sense that when the kingdom split under Rehoboam, which was Solomon's son, when the kingdom divided, so there was the 10 tribes that went to the north, that was referred to as Israel, and then there was what was referred to as Judah down south, but really it was Judah, Benjamin. So then there's the inheritance of Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, and Naphtali, and Dan. So and that's in chapter 19. So you can tell just by the number of tribes that are talked about in a short space of time, just how kind of quickly that was divvied up. So Simeon, oddly enough, their land was sort of between where Judah was and the Mediterranean Sea, kind of going into the Philistine territory. And over time, they kind of got amalgamated, into Judah somewhat. So when you look at the maps of this, which I'll show you next week, Simeon tends to his border tends to be not terribly well defined. And then there's the cities of refuge and the Levitical cities. Now, in terms of the cities of refuge, there were 3 of them on the western side of the Jordan, and there was 3 of them on the eastern side.
See the cities of refuge, that's where people could escape to from their,
yes.
They're safe from them.
Well, what reason they were there was if somebody killed somebody by accident, and their family then got wind basically of who killed so they could flee to those particular cities and be safe there until it got sorted out. So and then you have Levitical cities, which were again, the tribe of Levi didn't have a land inheritance because their inheritance was the Lord himself. They were the priestly tribe. But they got cities in which to dwell, because they obviously had to live somewhere. Because Israel was technically a theocracy, which was ruled by God. They were the ones that governed that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So and that's probably a good way to look at that. And then the last few chapters of Joshua is about then keeping the land. So we've conquered the land, divvied up the land. Now it's kind of maintaining it. All right. So there is the discussion about preserving unity. So this is a lot of sort of conversations that Joshua is having then with the children of Israel at a much later point. So there's a lot of chat about unity. And then Joshua's last words in chapter 23 and 24 is, that's those famous verses, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Okay, that's found in those chapters. But he talks about marital entanglements, so basically don't be intermarrying with the local, the people that have been conquered and all that kind of stuff, because they will drag you back into their gods and all that kind of stuff. And then that could lead to apostasy. And then the final bits in chapter 24 is then dealing with the burials of Joshua and other people. So So that's basically the outline. So what I want to do here, just for the last sort of 15 minutes or so, is talk about Joshua as a person, and see what he's like and where he shows up initially. So now the pastor in our own church here has done a big series on Joshua. So I'm not going to labor on too much stuff, but anyway, so Joshua the man. So the meaning of Joshua is the Lord is salvation. Okay, so the J in the front of a name usually has to do with the Lord, or Jehovah, or Yahweh, or however you want to term that. So and so then the Shua on the end of it is about salvation. Okay, now the name of Jesus is very, very close to this. His name is Yeshua. So if you talk to Messianic Jews, these are the Jewish converts today, they will very, very often refer to Jesus as Yeshua. So I have a Hebrew New Testament where I was looking at the English side, and then on the other side is the Hebrew, and I was looking up where it says Jesus Christ and comparing it with the Hebrew, and what it is in Hebrew is Yeshua HaMashiach, so Yeshua the Messiah. So because the Messiah is in Greek is Christ. Okay, so so just to look at Exodus 17 just initially. And this is where Joshua is first mentioned. Okay. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel and Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, so there we go. That's the first time Joshua is ever mentioned. Choose some men, go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. But when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy. So they took a stone, put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other, and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called its name, The Lord is my banner. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. So, so this is the first mentioning of Joshua as an individual, and he is, greatly relied upon by Moses in order to deal with Amalek. And Amalek, in a lot of ways, in the Bible, is a picture of the flesh. The Amalek was like around all the time. It just seems like there was always something going on with Amalek, and so it was a constant battle, and we would know that we're constantly battling with the flesh. Our flesh wants to do that which, is not what God would want us to do.
Yes, Amalek, where you get kids from.
Yes. Yeah. So, and they were nasty people. So, but Joshua, in terms of as an individual, Moses says something to Joshua, tells him something, and then in verse 10 it says Joshua did as Moses said. So Joshua is a man who listens. Okay, so it's important, for the person that is going into a land in order to take it and to mature and get on with it, we need to be people that listen. Okay, we need to listen to God. The Moses was the man of God. He was the man that was relaying the words of God. And so Moses, being his protege, listened to what he said, and then he did what he said. Okay. So that's what I want to pull out of this particular batch of verses is the fact that Joshua heard and Joshua did. Okay, so that's the type of person that we need to be going into the land. Now, in terms of other verses in Numbers 27, this is where Joshua actually is then inaugurated as the person to take over from Moses. So, and the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua, the son of Nun, with you, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him, set him before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation, and inaugurate him in their sight." Now, so this is where Joshua is basically told, God tells Moses, "Take this man. This is the man that is going to take over after you." And what God then cites about him, and that's why it's important when you're looking at individuals, in the Bible and doing character studies, is, you look at who they are and what is said about them. So what is said about Joshua that God notices here, God takes note. He says, "A man in whom is the Spirit." So if you want to get on in your Christian life, you have to be filled with the Spirit of God. You have to be walking in the Spirit of God. You need to be exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit of God. So this was Joshua. You don't want. I've seen this in too many churches and in too many situations where they go and they look at somebody who's standing there and go, "Oh, you're standing there. Sure, you can do that job. We'll take you." Well, there was no prayer in that. It was just the guy standing there, and you end up getting those particular people kind of roped in to do some kind of spiritual work in the church, and they have no business being there because God hasn't called them, and and I've seen this happen so often in full-time Christian work. It's unbelievable, So it's so important that God is the one that does the calling, not man, And so because here, the Lord says to Moses, "Take Joshua, the son of Nun, with you, a man in whom the Spirit is, lay your hand on him." Now, where this actually, I think, demonstrates itself, though, is a little bit earlier in the book of Numbers, and that is in Numbers 13. And this is the list of the men who were the spies to go in and look at the land. So we're talking about a number of chapters before, chapter 27. So you have this individual from Ephraim who's referred to as Yeshua, the son of Nun. Now, that's another name of Joshua, but that's what he was known as at that time. And what Yeshua means is just salvation. It doesn't mean the Lord is salvation. It just is just a name. It just surely means salvation. But then 8 verses later, in chapter 13, verse 16, as the names of these different men, one from each tribe had come, it says, "These are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Yeshua, the son of Nun, Joshua." So his name got changed. So, and how the name got changed was he took a very essential element of his name, which was salvation, but then bolted on, "The Lord is my salvation." So his whole identity, his whole character, his whole personage was really beefed up, because if you're going to go into the land, you're going to go in and grow as a Christian and that kind of thing. The Lord has to be the one on you. You can't just go as a, "Hi, I'm my little individual here."
Never tweaked that one.
So, yeah, I found that interesting that when I was looking at that. So this is the point at which Joshua's name gets changed. Now, when you look back in Exodus, at chapter 17, which is where Joshua first gets mentioned, I would believe that what he was known as back then was Bashir. Okay, because his name hadn't been changed yet. But because Moses is writing a compilation and a body of scripture, sometimes what you do is you go through, you go through and you say, okay, here's this guy, but later on his name was actually changed, but he would have been, so the Jewish writing is like this. Jewish writing tends to be summaries of what goes on. So sometimes when you read something like what happens with the Amalekites, it's with the understanding that you see the whole body of scripture
It's
there.
like Abraham.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So yes, yeah. So there's lots of examples of this in the Bible. Yeah. So so I just pluck out these things because looking at Joshua as the man who's God's instrument to take the land, Joshua listens, okay? Joshua does, and then Joshua has the Spirit, and Joshua has God very much threaded into the very fabric of who he is. So these are the essential elements of the man. Now, Joshua then should have said takes the lead there. I got my grammar wrong there. Sorry about that. That's what happens when you type quick. But what I want to do is I want to look at the first 9 verses, and this is where we'll finish up. And these are verses, when you hear these, you'll go, yes, heard these all before, but I'm going to try to tackle it again, as I do, from a slightly different angle. So after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving them, the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon I have given you, as I said to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and to the great sea toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory, and no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage, for to this the people shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all that the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So, now, what I want to do with this big reading here is highlight in color what God's doing, what God's telling us to do, and or telling Joshua to do, some of the positive things and some of the negative things, because there are, and when I mean negative, an example of that would be where God says, don't turn from it. Okay, that's a negative thing because it has a not in it, so it's telling you something not to do. Okay, so but it is overall positive in that sense. But just to highlight these things. So here we go. Oof. Okay, so up in purple, the Lord spoke. Okay, so again, when you're looking at these passages, look to see who's talking to who here. So this is a big fat statement of God. So and so right at the outset, chapter 1, verse 1, after the death of Moses, it came past that the Lord spoke. Okay, so again, Joshua was a man who was schooled and built on listening. So I swear, when you talk to people and stuff like this, about the things of God, they go, what I think is, they're not interested in hearing what God says. They're just, I think this, and I believe, but I really don't, that's no good. You need to hear God. So, and maybe that's a prayer that you need to say, when you get up in the morning and say, Lord, help me to hear you and help me to do, then what you say. So then in green is basically God telling Joshua what to be at. Okay, so he says there in verse 2, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise. Okay, so in other words, don't sit. Let's think about the opposites of these words. So if you're being told to arise, that means it's inferring that you're sitting. Okay, so you need to get up, because if you're going to move forward, you can't shuffle around on your bum. All right, so there's this command to get up, and then there is the command to go over. Okay, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh are like, that's okay, Moses, we're dead on. Our cows are happy. We got grass, so Bob's your uncle. We're good, And whereas really the command is go over. Go to a place you've not been before. You've not experienced this before. Get on with it. So go over this Jordan. And he doesn't just say you, he says you and all this people. I think it's interesting that the phrase that's used here is all this people. It's not all these people. You ever notice that in the Bible? Sometimes it talks about this people, and that's singular. When you talk about these people, that's like a bunch of people. Okay. Whereas when it says this people, we're talking about a unified, everybody goes over as a group. And then God gives promises that are in yellow here before the next batch of green stuff. And he says this down in the middle there, verse 5. So I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. And again, that is a sentiment that God sticks throughout the Bible. He basically says to a variety of people, see how you're going to get forward? It's because I'm with you. It's not because of necessarily what you're doing or the mechanics of the thing. It's the fact that I will be with you. God doesn't look at our education. God doesn't look at our experience. God doesn't look at a whole variety of things and go, oh, well, you have a degree in such and such, or you were good at doing a thing. And, it's like sometimes when Sunday school teachers are asked for or something like that, some people might point out an individual who teaches school, like primary school or something like that, say, oh, you would be a great Sunday school teacher. Maybe, maybe not. God's called you, that's fine. But if God hasn't called you, that's not where you should be, So, but the fact is that God is with you. So when Moses was called by God at the burning bush, Moses had 80 years of experience of how to be a leader. And then, that was in the first 40 years of his life. He learned that he was the bee's knees and the cat's pajamas and all that stuff. And then for 40 years after that, he learned he was nothing. And then God comes along at the age of 80 and talks to him out of the burning bush. And now God does not say to him, well, Moses, you've had all this experience of being in Egypt and how to communicate with people and how to deal with stuff and going through all this mishmash. What God's, Moses, goes, no, thanks God, you go and talk to somebody else. But what God says is, I will be with you.
And then later on, Moses says, I'm not going unless you're with me.
Yes. Yeah, very good. Yeah, because so Moses really understood, that idea of presence. I need God's presence. So then, as a result of that thing that's in the yellow, I will be with you, I will not leave you nor forsake you. Then God tells him other things that really have more to do with the internal makeup of who and what you are. One of the things I've been speaking about and ministering to people in the past week here is where it says in 1 Timothy 6, and you, O man of God, flee these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness or gentleness. And but when it talks about righteousness, it's talking about the external doing of a thing. Godliness is the internal drivers that allow that to happen. So if you're going to get on and do things in the promised land and take the inheritance and mature and grow and all that kind of stuff, well, you got to be strong and you got to be of good courage. Now, it's interesting that this is mentioned 2 other times because it says there in verse 6, be strong and of good courage. Verse 7 says, only be strong and very courageous. And then in verse 9, it says, have I not commanded you, be strong and of good courage. So now let's think about the opposites of these things. The opposites of strong is weak and timidity, mousiness. The opposite of courage is well, discouragement. Again, discouragement stops you from going on. Yeah. So we have these things of weakness and discouragement. So God knows that that's their problem. So that's why they need to be commanded to be strong and be of good courage. But why does it work? Why will there be strength? Why will there be courage? Because God's with you. So and then he goes on there after verse 6, be strong with good courage, for to this people you shall divide. Okay, so that action, once you're strong, once you're encouraged to do this, then you will go and you'll divvy it up properly. It's it's all an organized thing. It's not haphazard. It's not like, oh well, we'll see how it goes. Planning's good.
If you're with somebody who is strong and has those things, you tend to follow up and be like that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So and this is why a certain charismatic sort of people in the world, whether it's a church or or some tyrant in some flipping government somewhere, if they are of a charismatic nature, if they're of a strong nature, people gravitate to that because they want that. See, if you have mousiness and lack of leadership and stuff like that within a church or business or whatever the case is, it'll fall flat. It'll go to the wall. So but God has to be your leader, but I believe that God gives leadership to people to get on with it because he had a man to do this. So because as John Maxwell says, you don't want to just lead followers, you want to lead leaders. All of us are leaders, believe it or not, because we all have influence on somebody. You have influence on your grandkids. You have influence on your children. You have influence on your employees if you have such things. You have influence on your neighbors. You have influence with people in the church by sitting and talking to them. it could be a good or bad influence, but this is, why you have to then assess that. And if God is with you, he will make you be strong and be courageous and to do the right thing. That's why Paul says to Timothy, pursue righteousness and godliness, So, and then he repeats this, be strong, be courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law. So we're not talking about bits and pieces of the law. We're talking about, the whole thing. Now, he then does give these sort of negative insertions, which is, okay, while you're doing these things, don't turn from it. Okay, don't deviate from what God's telling you. Don't let the book of the law depart from your mouth. Talk about it. See when you talk about a thing, they say in Northern Ireland, you nail your colors to the mast. So see people that don't talk about their faith. They don't, it's not that you have to be a preacher. Maybe God hasn't, gifted you to be doing what I do or what John Taylor does or somebody else. But you can talk to your spouse. You can talk to your kids. You can read a verse of scripture and say, I was Elaine would say to the kids sometimes, I was reading in the Bible today this thing, and she'll put it on the WhatsApp family group, and there it is. And we can do things like that. And the feedback that we get is, boy, that really helped me today. That ministered to my soul today. And it doesn't have to be some long oration.
I've often thought sometimes you don't have to be long with people. Do you realize what football team we support?
Yeah.
You get that out of them.
Very quickly. Yeah.
We speak about the Bible the way we do
Yeah.
about football.
Yeah. So, and it's this weird sort of embarrassment thing, because we go, I'm really not sort of too good at that. And, and the devil feeds into that little notion, so, so the book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate. Okay. Now, we're not talking about Eastern meditation here, where you go okay, and have a blank mind or some such thing. What meditation in the Bible is about is chewing over an idea and thinking about it, mulling it over. What do you say? Ruminating, is that what you call that with the cows and all that kind of stuff? So
The cud.
Yeah, chewing the cud. Yes. So now, they talk about the five fingers on the hand in terms of reading the Bible and understanding the Bible. One finger is for hearing. This finger is for reading. This finger is for study. This finger is for memorizing. But it's hard to pick up the Bible with four fingers. You have to have a thumb, and that's meditation. Okay. So, because if you want to get a hold of the scriptures, you got to do all four of them things. Now, just meditation on it, you're not going to be able to pick up too much either. So, you have to read, you have to hear, you have to, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So, so you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written. So it's not just thinking the thing through and regurgitating it, as it were, and going, yeah, that's great, super. But it is then acting out that scripture.
You have to read the Bible in its context.
Yeah.
People pick into the Bible, try to put it in the art days.
Mm-hmm. No, sure. So, but then we have the word then in blue there, for then you'll make your way prosperous, and then you'll have good success. That's result stuff. Okay, so if you pray and God's speaking to you and says, right, I want you to arise, I want you to go over, this is going to work because I'm going to be with you. Be strong, be of good courage, divide, be strong, be very courageous, observe, don't turn, don't depart, meditate, observe, then
Yeah, the result doesn't come until you've done all those
Then.
things.
So then there's prosperity. Now, again, we're not talking about prosperity like Joel Osteen and all those, not,
Sounds to be blind.
yeah. So, but you have to realize that that what is being talked about here is spiritual prosperity, not Joel Osteen stuff. Okay. So, and oh, you'll get a promotion, you'll feel good about yourself. And, it's like, oh. So please. And then God repeats it. Have I not commanded you? Be strong. Because, God will repeat himself to you. He'll say, get this into you, get it into you, get it into you, get it. Did you hear this? Did you hear it? Listen to it. Come on. And, so be strong, be of good courage. Don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. And then God repeats this whole thing. I'm with you. Guess where? Wherever you go. So, it's a great way to start a book. Great way to start a book. And so we'll spend a few weeks just exploring some of these stories where this is the bedrock. This is what you latch onto. So